Welcome to the Free and Redeemed podcast. I am your host, Simon Andrade, and here on this specific show, we tackle over key topics that every single Christian struggles with. We bring in guests, we bring in godly wisdom, and more importantly, we bring in scriptures in the Bible to help you enhance your walk with God, bring in confidence, and put you into the direction of freedom and grace by the power of the Holy Spirit. If you're new to this platform, I encourage you to subscribe. With all that being said, guys, let's get started with today's episode. What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. Excited to be back once again. If you haven't listened to the last episode I recorded with Miss Paula Cornett, I'll leave the link in the description, or you could check it out right here. Really amazing episode. We talked about basically just the end times, the coming of the rapture, and all these exciting things that I do believe that we are drawing close to. So feel free to check that out. As far as I know, there's a lot of announcements that I would like to get to, but we're probably going to wait till the next episode to get to that. Probably a big announcement I would like to announce is we are close to 50 subscribers on this YouTube channel. And man, guys, I got to say, most people, anyone could say, oh, that's not that many subscribers. But guys, I remember when I first started this channel back in, I think it was last year. I didn't know the first thing of how to upload a YouTube video. And I think for a good solid 3 or 4 months, I just had one simple subscriber. And that was just what I like to call a social YouTube account, where I just use that YouTube account just to watch videos and all that stuff. But that's just showing, that this episode is coming a pretty good way. And I'm excited about what's going to happen in the future for Free Redeemed, especially for the more bigger announcement I will give possibly on the next solo episode. So stay tuned for that, guys. But if you're reading the title of this episode, you are probably genuinely reading it right. Should Christians drink alcohol? But notice I have part 2 on the title. And you may wonder, especially if you've been following the content pretty well or pretty faithfully, you may ask, well, come on, didn't you record an episode, more or less a guest episode on this specific subject? And yes, you are right, and that is correct. I did record a guest episode or an interview with someone who I did a quick collaboration with. Her name is Crystal. And the way I came across her profile was through a little social platform for podcasters. And when I read her story, guys, I mean, I got to tell you, her story, I thought it was amazing. I mean, just kind of hearing of how bad this addiction used to really be in her life, and what she went through during this addiction. And when I read her story, she really talked about the recovery side of finding the freedom of this specific subject, which in this case, it does involve alcohol. And I thought it was really amazing, especially for people who I know could really benefit from this subject. But I got to tell you, that episode, as much as I got to say there were some good things on there, once again, I got to say, I mean, it was her testimony. But there were some stuff that occurred during that recording that were, I would say, pretty unexpected. Stuff that I don't think I was really prepared for. And it did involve, first of all, let me tell you, the editing of that episode alone took me I almost didn't even meet the deadline for that week. It took me hours just to edit because there was so much stuff I had to take out and all that stuff. But I think the big one, and I don't want to go into too much detail or be too transparent, out of respect, I mean, for certain things in that episode. But I think the big thing that I was not prepared for was what I really wanted the outcome of the episode to be. And of course, the outcome wasn't for people to say, oh, should Christians drink alcohol? And the answer should be no. I mean, if you really listen to the episode, at one point in the episode, we kinda get outside that subject, and it really became a thing where it was more or less her having this certain debate with someone who used to be a therapist in her life. But I gotta say, episode I do think did come out pretty good. But I ultimately think the big issue was I don't really believe we got the true message out on this specific subject of alcohol. And if you really remember, what we really covered in that specific episode or that interview was there are two sides of the perspective of alcohol. And, what I really say in the beginning is I say, there are some Christians who overall just think alcohol is a sinful substance and it needs to be avoided 100%. No Christian or no person who calls themselves a believer should even think of drinking alcohol, more or less even take a sip or casually drink it. And if they do, then therefore, this is sinful and it needs to be thrown away, all this stuff. And we have another side where people are more open to it, saying, you know what, alcohol is completely okay. It just comes down to the concept of drunkenness. And some people, and I got to even say myself including, do believe that alcohol has certain boundaries that could be potentially followed, but we definitely know that there's a struggle on it. And, the conclusion I really came up with in that episode is alcohol definitely could be a stronghold in somebody's life. We know alcohol, I tried to really cover this in the last episode or the part one episode that alcohol potentially could be used in a very nice and, mannerful way where people can simply, let's say, drink a glass of wine and it doesn't affect them at all. They're not drunk, they're not buzzed, and they can go about their day, go about their week, and simply just say, hey, look, this isn't something that's a stronghold or a struggle in my life. But really try to make it known, and I based it off of the testimony of my guest that yes, alcohol can be a stronghold in someone's life. And I think people really kind of like miss that fact or they try to kind of brush that fact under the rug when it comes to the concept of alcohol. But I really say, you know what? Sometimes we got to identify if alcohol could really be a problem. And, I really kind of come down to the fact like is it necessary for believers to drink alcohol? Is it necessary for them to drink it at all? Is it necessary for them to even drink, period? And let's just say in front of members in the congregation or people who may not even identify as Christian. I think I really tried to come down to the fact of if we know it's a stronghold, then is it even necessary for a believer to drink alcohol as well? And the conclusion I really came up with is I said, well, if you know this is a stronghold in your life, then I think you need to hold yourself accountable and be okay with saying no and moving on because you know what? This podcast is really designed for freedom. But if I said, you know what? If you know that this is not an extreme struggle in your life, can you ultimately say no to alcohol? Can you be at a social setting? Everyone's drinking a beer, everyone's drinking an alcoholic beverage. Could you easily say, no, I don't need to drink? I'm choosing not to drink. Or do you need an alcohol basically at a very frequent pattern in your life where, let's say, you wake up in the morning and you're like, man, I would really like a beer, or I would really like, man, I could really use a shot right now, and all this stuff. And, that's just something I really want to cover in today's episode because I feel like a lot of times, the debate that we have in Christianity is, just the view of what we have with this subject, and that's the concept of alcohol. Most people, we look at alcohol as a simple substance that definitely has some consequences to it. But I think we either legalize the heck out of alcohol or we compromise the heck out of it. And that's why I brought up those two sides and I brought up the different scriptures. And sometimes I think we look at Christians as, these people, they're just taking away fun. They don't make alcohol fun. People are just trying to have a good time and all this stuff. Well, I got to tell you, in this episode, I'm not really here to tell you, nope, stop drinking alcohol. You need to stop. Oh, you need to stop it and all this stuff. I think a very safe, I wouldn't even say safe, but like a more mature word that I really want to use for this specific subject is the word caution. What's the whole concept of caution? Well, caution is basically, I mean, a good example, we all know this. You see a tape, let's say if it's in construction, someone's like they're digging a hole or there's something, they put a caution tape on there to let you know, hey, don't go past this tape. Why? Because there could be destruction ahead. Or why? Because let's say there's construction and if someone goes past that, let's say they're driving a car, well, they're gonna drive into something that's not structured. They're gonna drive into something that could either damage their car or cause something that's pretty fatal or cause a serious accident. And ultimately, as a Christian, I think that's how we really need to view alcohol is we really need to caution people instead of those two things that I really talked about, legalize or compromise the subject. I want to just quickly give three simple reasons why Christians need to caution alcohol. And I gotta say, before I really get into these points, I want to say, you know what? Alcohol has been something that I have personally been open to. Of course, alcohol used to really be a struggle in my life before I became a Christian. And I stopped drinking for a really long time, but there were certain periods in my life, if I have to be transparent and vulnerable, where I was open to drinking alcohol, which involved mostly wine beverages. I never drank beer, or I used to drink beer back in, you know, before I was a Christian. But there were certain beverages I basically avoided. But there were certain beverages I was open to. Wine was one of them. To start this episode off, one of the main reasons why I think we need to caution alcohol is number one, drinking alcohol likely results in an addiction. No, I'm not saying one sip of alcohol will equal an automatic addiction and one sip of beer, one sip of wine, and all, just any type of beverage, one sip, oh, it will result in an addiction. I'm not really trying to say that. I want to go so much more than that. My first question that I asked my guest in the part one episode was why do people typically get drunk? Or why do you think people drink alcohol to get drunk? And her response surprised me actually, because she says, I don't believe people drink to get drunk. I think people just drink because they like it. And there was a part of me that did agree a little bit with her answer. But then I think as she kind of went on, there was, I kind of see myself at the end. I was like, well, that didn't really answer my question. But the reason why I asked that question towards her, because I knew she was a former alcoholic, is when people drink, most of the time, there's the intention of knowing that they're possibly going to get drunk. And how do I know that? Well, when someone typically, let's say, cracks open a beer, she mentioned, and my guest even mentioned this in the episode. She says, "Oh, I drink it mostly for football because it's good." Let's say someone cracks open a beer, they're watching a football game, let's say a UT Longhorn football game, Dallas Cowboys game, whatever. Most of the time, once they finish that first can, in the ice chest, there's possibly more beverages in there. The most typical response is, let me crack open another one. Let me have another one. That felt great. Crack, another one, crack, another one, crack, another one, crack. And then by the time, let's say the fourth quarter's over, well, what do you believe typically happens? Well, I gotta tell you guys, typically that person's possibly gonna be drunk if they had more than one, maybe even more than two beer cans. And why do you think that is the case? Why do you think people have to have more than one beverage, more than one alcoholic beverage when it comes to drinking? Well, I think we have to understand what the main concept of alcohol really does to a person when they drink it. I remember this friend of mine, I mean, we were talking, I'm probably gonna see him later this afternoon, before I head to the young adult service, but he knows exactly who I'm talking about. He'll probably even text me, once I give this little low-key shout out, but back to the episode. But I remember when after a young adult service, we all sat down, we talked about this subject, and I remember one thing he said, and part of me was like, "Man, I wish we were doing a podcast episode right now," because it was me and a group of friends. We were in the restaurant. We were just talking about this subject, and something I'll never forget. He goes, "Why can't people just substitute alcohol for beverages that don't get them drunk? Let's say pineapple juice, soda, or something they know won't get them drunk." and yet they know it's just as good as drinking, you know, an alcoholic beverage. And my answer to him that I gave is I said, because you got to remember what alcohol does to a person. Let's talk about the more positive side. I said, alcohol typically has this specific dopamine effect when people drink it. How do I know that? Well, even there's so many research studies that prove this. And one of the most notable ones that I read, it was a blog post on Karen Treatment Center, recovery.com. They basically talk about the addiction of alcohol, but they said, what is the likely chance a person gets addicted to alcohol when they drink it for the first time? And this was what they responded with. They said more than 6% of adults in the US have an alcohol use disorder. About 1 in 12 men and 1 in 25 women, an additional 623,000 people between the ages of 12 and 17 have alcohol use disorders. Check this out. About 88,000 people die every year of alcohol related causes in the United States. And something they also talked about on there is they say likely a person who becomes an alcoholic starts between the ages of 14 and 17. And that really, I mean, there's a part of me that's not really shocked by those numbers because coming from someone who has drank alcohol before, I got to tell you, when you drink alcohol, typically when I say there's a dopamine effect towards it, is alcohol has this effect where it relaxes you. If let's say I'm sitting down, it's a long day, I have a glass of wine, or maybe I drink a Mike's Hard lemonade, whatever you want to say. I don't care if it's beer, I don't care if it's liquor. Typically, alcohol has this effect where you just feel this relaxing feeling. And it's no different from coffee. This is why you even see people who can't get through one morning without having like 3 or 4 cups of coffee. And why is that? Because it's a dopamine effect that, yes, can come from a beverage, any type of beverage. It's how it makes you feel. It makes you feel good. And there's a reason why people are really trapped in this addiction. And it's because we become addicted to the feeling, even if that results in drunkenness. Drunkenness, let's be honest, in the moment, it feels good. It feels great. When you become drunk or you become buzzed, yes, you know that there could be an impact, but it does something inside of you where it feels pleasurable. And this is coming from someone who has been drunk before, who used to get drunk all the time, honestly. And when this really becomes an addiction, it becomes this thing, and it's the whole concept of pleasure. And this is where you could really tell because I know people who might have heard the end of part one could say, oh, I definitely know alcohol doesn't have a problem, or it's not a problem in my life, when in reality it totally is. And the way you know alcohol has a strong effect in your life is, my question to you is, if you have an addiction to something, typically you cannot go on without it. It becomes part of your life. And a good example I can give is like, if you the way it and this is not just for alcohol, this is for drugs, sexual sin, whatever you want to say, that is pretty much like a drug. Your body is so drawn to it. Your body has to have that dopamine effect from it because your body has become so used to it. And if you can go, let's say, if you can't go one day without it, then that's definitely the cause of an addiction. But if you have a hard time saying no, if it's like this urge, like, man, I really just need to crack open a beer. I just really need to drink something that I know has this specific content or substance in it, then that's how you really know. It's no different from pornography. When there's this urge to look at pornography, when there's this urge to go somewhere where no one's looking and masturbate, we know that's an addiction. And it's hard for you to say no. It's hard for you to resist because you're in a vulnerable spot in this subject. And that's why I really want to say is this could definitely become something that, why do we need to caution alcohol because of an addiction? Is because this could be something where someone no longer has self control under it. And we know that the fruits of the spirit, one of the big breaking points was to have self control. And most people today don't have self control with alcohol. And this could even be Christians. And why do we need to, even if this is an addiction, why do we need to really caution this? And why do people drink to get drunk? Because we identified the easy part is because how it makes them feel. But I think it also goes so much beyond that. Some people even asked me recently, like in that part one episode, why did you use sex as an analogy? Like sex has nothing to do with alcohol. Well, believe it or not, it actually does. It's pretty much the same concept a little bit. Yes, the Bible kind of gives a little bit of a thumbs up of drinking alcohol, but we got it. Well, the reason why I use sex is because we know sex, there is a positive side to sex. There is an approving side of sex. And why is that? Because God created sex. That's what I used in the analogy. But something really want to use in this episode, just to clarify a little bit more, is sex had a purpose with it. It wasn't just to multiply. It wasn't just to be fruitful, as God said, but a part of that purpose was for what? Pleasure. Sex is a pleasurable experience between you and another person. And how often have we perverted that? How often, as us as humans, have we destroyed that purpose and we've made it our own? We've used something that God has created and we made it our own and just used it. And before you know it, we become a slave to it. And there's a side where God is putting his thumbs up and said, yes, this is exactly why I created it for. Don't be ashamed of that if you and your spouse are being intimate. But we have perverted it where we now become addicted to, hey, if your wife's not making love to you, or if your spouse is choosing to not make love to you, it's okay to get on your laptop and watch something that satisfies that sexual need. If your spouse is not fulfilling your sexual needs, then it's okay for you to go find it with somebody else because you're no longer satisfied with what they're giving you. Rather if it's self-pleasing or finding someone else to please you, that's ultimately where the addiction really becomes born. And it's a caution. It's not saying, hey, don't do it at all, but it's to say, hey, we need to set boundaries. We need to look at this and really evaluate this. And that's why one of the main scriptures that people really use when it comes to the whole concept of alcohol is in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 18. This is why Paul says, do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. That's a really interesting verse when it comes to not really condoning drinking alcohol. Notice here it doesn't even really say, "Hey, do not, just don't get drunk at all." Like, no, Paul I think is really really advising Timothy or advising the church. When he's speaking to other believers, is he's saying, you know what? You can find fulfillment in the Spirit. And he's really reminding them in chapter 5 of Ephesians of the power and the concept of the Holy Spirit. Most people become addicted to alcohol because there's this specific void that that is trying to be fulfilled in their life. And I think that's where the debate really started in part 1 is no, people don't get drunk because they're trying to fill a void. And part of me was like, well, then what is that? That was my kind of challenging question. Then what do you think the issue is? And once again, an answer wasn't really given. But that's why Paul is telling people, he's telling believers, you know what? There are ways you can fill your void, and it's your relationship with the Holy Spirit. And most of the time, I think we use alcohol to fill something in us, fulfill something. And if that is the case, then that leads me into point number 2 is drinking alcohol has invisible consequences. As you heard in my first episode or part 1, as I said, I tried talking mostly about the boundaries of alcohol and what needs to be, advised when it comes to going over this subject. And I think that's the biggest issue that we have, more specifically in our Christian community with alcohol, is some people may ask, just like, the concept of dating, I guess you can say, is how much is too much? Oh, I know I can drink. I just know I can't get drunk. So therefore, what are the things I can do with alcohol and what are the things I can't do? I'll make sure I'll do that. This one good friend of mine, I remember when he preached a sermon, this was years ago, he had this really unique concept of boundaries, more specifically on dating, but I know this could be used with alcohol as well. During his sermon, he told someone to demonstrate something in the sermon, he said, "I want you to stand over here towards the corner of this wall right here." He goes, "Right here, about 10 or 15 yards away, there's a little line." He goes, "I want when you stand against this wall, I'm gonna shout out, 'Ready, set, go,' boom, and I want you to run as fast as you can. And when I yell stop, you have to stop at the place I tell you to stop." And he goes, "Is that an easy challenge you think you can do? You can't go past this line. You gotta remember that." Guy goes, "I got it." He goes, "Okay." The guy stands there at the wall and he goes, "Okay, ready, set, go." Boom. And the guy, I remember he took off running really fast. And he was not even super close to the line, but my friend yelled, "Stop." And the moment he yelled stop, you could tell this guy wanted to stop at the place he was at, but the momentum that he already had with the speed he was going was not enough for him to stop at the place where he was told to stop. What ended up happening? Well, that momentum was so strong, he ended up going past the line. And my friend during that sermon says, "You see," he goes, "there you go." He goes, "That's what we need to think about when it comes to boundaries." People think that, hey, I won't go past this line. But sometimes he goes, "I don't think we should even go towards the line, period." And I think that's the same concept with alcohol. Sometimes I think we got to look at alcohol as, should we even drink it at all? Or is it even necessary for me to drink, period? And I remember this one specific YouTuber, and I'm not going to say his name because he does have a pretty high following. I remember when he covered this subject, there was something that really got my attention about his sermon, but there was one specific thing I did not agree with, and I think it was his view on Christians drinking alcohol, period. And one statement he specifically made is he said, "If your pastor drinks," he goes, "you need to leave his church." He goes, "He's being an embarrassment to the kingdom," and all this stuff, and just saying, you know what, he's not following the will of God, and all the just this stuff. And when I said that, I really my response towards that was, man, that is such a worldly sorrow perspective. Hey, don't drink because, hey, that's an embarrassment. If you're a Christian and you're drinking, that's just such an embarrassment towards others around you. But I think we really need to look at it from a perspective of, we should not be drinking in front of Christians, or we should not catch other people drinking, us drinking. We should not allow people to see us drinking to get drunk, or drinking to, resulting in drunkenness. And if you're a Christian and people are watching you get drunk and still seeing you, trying to live a godly life, I think that's where we got to say, okay, this is where the problem is. When I say, when it comes to the concept of boundaries, I gave my testimony, and this is where I think she had a hard time really accepting, the answer I gave. But I simply said, there's a reason why maybe I choose not to drink in front of certain people anymore. And the whole concept was not because I care about what others think of me, other believers or maybe unbelievers, but it's like, what example am I really portraying at the end of the day? There's a story I really want to give, and I'm not going to be super transparent with it, but I know some people who listen to my show know exactly what I'm going to be talking about here because some of them were witnesses. But going back to the first point, as I said, alcohol likely becomes an addiction. And we got to understand that when I say, what are the invisible consequences, especially when it comes to the concept of example. Well, I remember this was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I attended I would attend this young adult service, or this young adult ministry, literally all the time. I was going every week. And in the beginning, it was all great. But I remember when I went to this group, we all started hanging out after the service to go to this specific social place where it was pretty much a restaurant. We would all really just go because, I mean, they had some pretty decent food and they closed really late. They would always close at 2 in the morning. Used to. But I remember specifically, they also had a bar there. And some people were open to pretty much buying alcoholic beverages. I will confess and say I was one of those people. And something that really made me realize that, what are we doing here? Especially if we're trying to be godly people. If we're trying to live up to the expectations as Christians is when I'll never forget one specific time. People typically would drink, and most of the time, I would say not even most of the time, all the time, people would end up becoming drunk. You knew it was becoming this thing where people were drunk, people were no longer the way they were maybe a few hours ago at service. And it's like, what are we doing here? Well, the way I truly, truly knew this was a problem was when I remember seeing a friend of mine who I haven't talked to in a while, but still, I would say I'm still friends with him to this day. I'll never forget, he was completely wasted out of his mind. I'm sober, of course, I'm not drunk. And I say, man, you probably need to get a ride home. I don't think you should drive home. And he was so drunk, he was stumbling, everything. He's like, nah, I'm fine, man, I'm fine. And this was someone who was new to that ministry. And before I knew it, I just knew, what are we doing here? And I think this is the concept of lukewarm Christianity, is where we start to compromise something and we become carnal to it. And it's like at the end of the day, people I knew this was starting to become a stronghold, and it bothered me when I knew how this started. It started by other people in that ministry seeing someone who was really respected in that ministry, who actually was over that ministry, drinking a beer, drinking alcohol. And when people saw him get drunk, when people were starting to see him get drunk, therefore it became this thing like, it's okay for me to be drunk. It's okay for me to drink then. And therefore, boom, it all just started from there. And that's what I mean by alcohol has invisible consequences. So if your pastor, let's say, drinks alcohol, no, I don't think you should leave his church. But I got to say, what is your pastor's perspective on alcohol? Does he, first of all, I don't think people should really know if their pastor drinks alcohol. But I think if your pastor kind of gives the thumbs up about it and then he basically really encourages people to drink and it becomes this carnal mindset, this carnal approach and everything, and people start becoming addicted to it. And if you know this is you, I got to tell you, not only are there consequences, but you know what? As a leader of God, God will hold you accountable for it. And that was something that really convicted me. And that's where I said, you know what? No more. The internet is one large community today with some of our most cherished websites. This can include YouTube, Google, social media platforms, our favorite streaming services, and of course, online shopping from some of our favorite stores like Amazon. And as great as all of this can be, guys, we have to be aware that there are potential hackers, malicious bots, and destructive viruses that could really destroy your device and take all of your valuable information with just the click of a button. That's why I want to introduce you guys to NordVPN, our sponsor for today's episode. Take your cybersecurity to the next level and sign up for NordVPN's threat protection feature. You don't need to download a VPN server or download a malicious software to put protection on your specific device. NordVPN gives you the option to connect their software to multiple devices with simply just the click of a button. You don't need to track any of your actions online and take a look at a specific email with a suspicious URL and wondering, oh my gosh, is this a potential virus? NordVPN got you covered and is protecting everything inside your specific device. And if you click on the link in the description, you'll be introduced to NordVPN's deals that they have for the new year. They also do offer a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not satisfied with your service. Also, one thing to mention, guys, is you also have access to choosing how you want to block certain websites. And yes, that does include pornographic websites. Make the option to put protection on your devices today with NordVPN's protective threat feature. You could pay annually or even monthly with simply just the new packages that they have for the new year. Put protection on all of your devices today, including even your location. Okay, guys, back to the episode. No more. I am not going to drink. I am not. I mean, this is not something I really want in my walk with God. And I got to tell you, there are some people that were in that setting. I got to say, to this day, still have that stronghold in their life. They're still drinking, and a lot of them are open to say, "Yep, I who's going to get drunk first? Who's going to get effed up first?" And all this stuff. And it all started by just them seeing a leader proclaiming Jesus do that, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's okay for me to do it then. And you see where the consequences really come. And one of them, who was really trying to stop, just a lot of stuff, was really going on in their life. And it got to a point where, yeah, one of them had to go through rehab, from what I know. And that leads me into my final point. Number 3 is one of the main reasons why Christians should really caution alcohol is because drinking alcohol could seriously ruin your life. There's a reason why Paul says, I have the right to do anything, but you say everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. When I talked about the example towards the end of the episode, I said, if you're, I challenged my guests a bit, and I told her, I said, I don't know you. And if I'm a Christian trying to really help you, do you think am I being an example? Am I being that loving example towards you if I'm choosing to drink in front of you? If your goal is to get free, then what place do I have trying to do that if I have the thumbs up to do it? And number 3, I'm really trying to say, well, one of the main reasons why we need to caution alcohol is because I have seen alcohol over the years ruin different people's lives who I've personally known. Some of them I could even say can be relatives. And that's why I think Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1 really just says it very plainly. It says, wine is a mocker and beer is a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise. Alcohol could not just change a person from the outside, it could change a person from the inside as well. There is one specific person who I specifically remember growing up. This person was like family. And he was like he was the best friend of a relative of mine. He would attend all these family events, him and his wife and his son. They would attend, and they were very close to everyone in my family. And I got to tell you, when he was a sober guy, he was the most sweetest, nicest guy you would ever meet. He was very outgoing, very extroverted, funny guy too. He was always making my mom laugh. But it was very clear from the outside looking in that alcohol or getting drunk was a stronghold, a deep stronghold in his life. Every single time we would really see him, most of the time he was always drinking a beer. And most of the time we would see him at family events, he was drunk. And when he would get really drunk, just like how drunkenness really needs to be explained, he was a different person. He was very loud. He had an anger, he had a strong temper, especially towards his wife. And he was not afraid to say things that typically a sober man should not say to other people. And it always involved, fighting with my relative and just all these toxic things that were happening over the years. And people really began to explain to him, that man, alcohol is really a bad thing in your life. And I mean, it just got so much worse. It got so much worse. And coming to find out the main reason why he was getting drunk all the time, why he became this extreme alcoholic is because it was learned that he grew up in an abusive home. He grew up seeing things as a young kid that no kid should see. So therefore, when he would drink, it's just like it was a way he admitted that I remember he admitted this one time that it would soothe his pain. But I remember it got so much worse to a point where it affected his not only affected his marriage, it got him to a point where because of alcohol, he ended up losing his job. Because of alcohol, it ended up affecting his reputation. He used to coach a youth basketball team, in some youth sports, and he knew my dad pretty well. And I remember, parents even in the basketball team used to always complain, saying he's always drunk. He seems very weird. His alcohol or his breath always smells like alcohol. Until one specific time, his drunkenness got him to a place that you got to say, I mean, where could it have gotten him? His wife called the police on him. I mean, a lot of tragic stuff happened in his family where it resulted in him going to prison. And while he was in prison, and of course, he was not able to drink alcohol, and it affected him. And even though he tried, I mean, at one point, I remember he tried getting his life back together. He ended up passing away in prison, you know, due to something that was related to his alcoholic addiction. And it affected his liver, all this stuff. It affected his physical health. But you gotta be honest, I remember even as a young teenager seeing the time when he was in prison, it's like, man, he's in rock bottom. He's in rock bottom, and why is that? Because alcohol, at the end of the day, your addiction sometimes could ruin your life. So should Christians drink alcohol? My honest answer is I'm sticking with the same thing. We know that there's a thumbs up side about drinking alcohol. Personally, if I have to be honest and transparent as my place, let's say as a Christian, I'm going to say this. I'm open to drinking alcohol. Let's say a glass of wine. I'm open to drinking possibly, let's say, a pina colada or something that does involve alcohol in it. But I think I realize now in my life that it's not really worth pursuing something that I know could have some caution effects towards it. So therefore, I know that this could become a struggle in my life. So therefore, I don't frequently drink the way I used to. Even this past Sunday, when I went to go eat at a really nice restaurant with my family, I asked for a pina colada. The waiter asked me, he goes, "Would you like that with alcohol or virgin?" And I made the decision to say, "Hey, I'm going to drink it virgin." And it was just as good. And that was okay with me. And why is that's something I got to say is I could easily say no to alcohol, but I know that could get to a point if I compromise it enough to where I know I won't be able to do that. I basically saying I'm okay with myself drinking, but there's times in my life where you know what, I choose not to drink. And I think that's what Christians really need to look at. But if you know that alcohol is a problem in your life, I'm here to say, get help. Get some help. Find someone who's going to help you with this addiction. Because I got to tell you, I've seen people, and as you just heard that, I hope that testimony really helped you to understand that there are dangerous effects towards alcohol, not just on the outside or in the inside, but overall, your whole entire reality could be destroyed. So that's a caution I really want to give to people. Other than that, I got to say, I'm not here to tell people to stop drinking or no, Christians shouldn't drink at all. I'm here to tell people we need to caution alcohol. And I want to pray us out. Lord, we thank you for today's episode, Lord. We thank you that you are fixing something up good for people, Lord. You are giving them a new revelation, God, on this subject. Father God, I pray that people who may be struggling with this, God, that you are giving them a new perspective, Lord. You are giving them a new perspective, a new heart to find their freedom towards this, Lord. I pray that Christians do not no longer become legalistic towards this subject or no longer compromising towards this subject, Lord, but they will come to you in a balanced mindset, Lord. They know that their struggles don't define them, Lord, and that you are building them up into a new person. We thank you for all of this, Jesus. In your mighty name we pray. Amen. All right, guys. Thank you so much for today's episode. Once again, if you're new here, feel free to subscribe, like this video, share it. And we are excited to continue on with what we are doing here in the Free and Redeemed podcast. God bless.